consequences, right? Now, we see this happening throughout history, and remarkably, what we see the Lord doing with his people is, in some sense, he's not copying the nations. He's actually, the nations are copying him, but he's also demonstrating remember we talked about God kind of babbles, he condescends to his people, he interacts with them in ways that they can comprehend and understand, terms that are familiar to them. Covenants would have been very familiar to people in the ancient Near East, right? When Abraham is called out from basically a bunch of pagan peoples, God makes a covenant with him. Abraham understands conceptually what's happening. It's just instead of a big nation coming to small nation, it's God speaking and making covenant with me, Abraham, for some reason. Right? So these covenants, we can see them modeled in history with other peoples, with other nations. But for our purposes, if it's normally big, strong nation, little, weak nation, who's the authority? If this is a relationship under authority, who is the authority? God, right? Okay, so all covenants, and in fact, all, everything that happens in a covenant comes down from God. All these covenants, he's the one who establishes the terms, right? And you'll notice that when you read in the scriptures, the terms aren't up for negotiation, right? They don't each send their representatives and lawyers and stage, kind of a term of, what do you call that? Not negotiation, but another term I'm thinking of, arbitration. Like, let's try to figure out, let's push back a little bit. We don't agree with it. No, God establishes the terms, and it's all or nothing, take it or leave it. This is how he relates to his people. And all of his relationships with his people are covenantal. Now, under God, I don't have my eraser, so my hand's about, here we go. It begins. Not so bad. All right. Also, we're just going to leave God there because he is the authority, right? He's the one who establishes the covenant. All these other covenants also have what we would call a covenant head. A covenant head. Can you all give me an example? Noah, right? Now, if there's a covenant head, why is there a covenant head? Who do these covenants relate to? Who is under the covenant God makes with Noah? Everybody, right? But he makes the covenant specifically and directly with Noah, but to the benefit and the blessing, or really to the peril of everyone under him. Give me some other examples. Adam, right? Adam's the great example, right? If we want to, and I'm kind of out of order or disorganized in my presentation of this stuff here this morning, so hopefully you can kind of understand or keep up in some sense. We have this, and I've got no space already to write this down. Sorry, God is still there. He is always there, right? I'm gonna write this term bicovenantal framework. Okay, now there are different views on the scriptures and how many covenants there are and what the Mosaic covenant is. I'm not going to get into that for our purposes here this morning. But this is arguably the historic Reformed understanding of the scriptures. If we say the scriptures are structured by covenants, we say that they are bicovenantal, meaning there are primarily two covenants, and you know this. So which two covenants am I referring to? The old and the new, the covenant of works and the covenant of grace, right? And even old and new kind of muddies the water, but let's think covenant of works, covenant of grace. Who's the covenant of works made with? Adam. All right, so we could do this with every one of the covenants in the scriptures, but let's see. We've got covenant of works, right? The head is Adam. Now, these covenants also always have these different conditions or terms. We're talking about the covenant of works. Oh, eraser, thank you. And another color so I can get creative here. If we've got Adam as the covenant of works head, right? God comes to Adam and establishes with him a covenant. What are the terms of that covenant? Perfect. And I think the confession has this great language, perfect and perpetual obedience, right? The terms of the covenant of works are perfect and perpetual obedience. If Adam perfectly and perpetually obeys, is faithful to the Lord, then, okay, what are the benefits? What's the blessing? which is itself life, right? This life is the benefit of this covenant. What's the consequence? Death. Okay, pretty simple, right? My writing gets worse and worse as the marker goes lower and lower. All right, so covenant of works. If we're talking bicovenantally, the first covenant that God makes with his people is historically called the covenant of works. Some call it the covenant of life, but the head of it is Adam. Now, who is under Adam's headship? Everyone, right? All of his, what's the word that the confession uses? Not offspring. I'm forgetting it, but that's okay. Everyone who has descended from Adam. I want you to turn to Romans 5. I'm not going to go too in depth with these verses, but Romans 5 is where we're probably going to be as we look at covenant of works and covenant of grace, how they relate, and so forth. But Romans 5, starting in verse 12, Paul says, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin. So Adam sins, and as a result, Adam dies. Now, wait a second. How Adam keeps living, though? What do you mean Adam dies? He didn't die on the spot. Spiritual death, right? Adam dies a spiritual death in the sense that he is cut off from that free and full, that walking in the Lord walks in the garden with him. He doesn't have that free and full connection to relationship with the Lord. There is now an issue. He has spiritually died, and then we know natural death eventually, inevitably follows. To the dust he will return, right? Sin comes into the world, right? It comes into the whole world, and death just so comes into the whole world through sin. Death spreads to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin isn't counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses. In other words, sin was still there. He's arguing with the Jews, who are kind of saying, well, no sin without the law, right? But clearly sin without the law, because death without the law. So death reigns from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam. In other words, though the law wasn't given in written form like it is after Moses, they're still disobeying God and departing from him and deserving of death. So Adam, our covenant head in the covenant of works, fails. And as a result, all who are in Adam are dead. We die, right? We are all under this consequence. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. We call this, again, the covenant of works, the covenant of life. Is there grace in this covenant? Trick question. Yes, there is. Why do you say that? He had to perfectly and perpetually obey. That's not grace. Oh, well, there's grace, and God shows him grace in the patience, right? In not killing him instantly, but instead offering a route to salvation. Okay, so there's grace in Adam's, let's say, in the opportunity, right? In fact, the fact that God makes a covenant, none of this is, God doesn't have to do this. God doesn't owe man anything. God could have made man and done whatever he wanted with and to us. But instead, he graciously condescends and says to Adam, and through Adam to us all, in some sense, hey, I've given you this beautiful, lush garden, all the food you need to eat, and I've given you plenty of work to do, the strength and the ability and the opportunity to do it. So go forth, be fruitful, multiply, take, eat, live. And if you do, you're going to live. You're going to live. You can have life. This is grace from God. The covenant of works is itself inherently gracious because God doesn't have to do this. He could just make us robots or slaves that just have no option or opportunity to do anything but obey. And the moment we do, he just, right? It's an offer of life. Though, of course, we failed. Now, after this covenant of grace, after this covenant of works is made, we see a series of other covenants. Right? First of all, what's the next one that we see in the scriptures? Noah, right? What's the covenant he makes with Noah? Yeah, turn there with me. Turn to Genesis chapter 9. And there's some great material you can read, great books worth reading about the repetitiveness of the language that the Lord uses in his covenants with, how you can compare so much of what he says to Noah here to what he said to Adam before, what he's going to say to Abraham next, and on and on and on. But Genesis 9, look at verse 7. Talk about echoing and God repeating language. You, Noah, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it. So that's the blessing. There's a command. He's, in a sense, reestablishing what he already established with Adam. But verse 8, continuing here, then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant. Now, Hebrew scholars, commentators love to point out that word establish really has an emphasis on reaffirming, right? It's not creating a new covenant. There's language for that in the scriptures in the Hebrew, and it's often the verb to cut. When God forms a new covenant, he cuts a covenant. Here he's reaffirming, establishing his existing covenant with Noah now, and your offspring after you, every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. So Noah is now, we could say, the head, and this covenant gets a little bit weird. It's a bit confusing to some of us, or maybe all of us. Me too. All right, we've got Noah as the head of the covenant here, right? But who now is under Noah's headship? Everything, right? Everything. Now, and he keeps going on, he talks about, we get the rainbow as the sign of the covenant. Covenants also, it's another ingredient that I didn't mention before, common ingredient we could write here is there are signs of these covenants often. We won't worry so much about that just because we don't have all the time to. But, so he goes on, and talks about the rainbow, which is to be this reminder that, right, when man sees the rainbow in the sky, why is it called a rainbow? The shape of it, right? And how is this the shape of a bow? What way is it aiming? Anybody know? Up, right? At the Lord in some sense, who's actually saying, look, this is the assurance I give you, I'm going to keep my word. The bow is aimed at me. If I should break, right, if I should break the covenant, I will suffer the consequences, right? But jump back up to chapter 8, verse 20. For me, it's on the same page, but he establishes this covenant, keeps this covenant going with Noah. Now, let me ask, why did the flood happen? Right? The thought and intention of man is wicked from his youth, every thought and intention, down to his heart. And so what does the Lord do? Wipes out all life on the earth. Except Noah. Right? He pushes reset, establishes his covenant with Noah. But look at verse 20 and following here. Noah builds an altar to the Lord after the flood. Took some of every clean animal, some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, listen to this, I will never again curse the ground because of man. I'm never going to do this again, this wiping out of all flesh. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of his heart is evil from his youth. What? you understand what he's saying? I'm never going to do this again because man is only evil from his youth. How does that make sense? Why is he saying, I'm never going to do this again? Because the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. God is making a point here. All right. Sin is the problem. Again, you want to have one of your overarching themes throughout the Scripture. It's that it's God dealing with sin in the midst of, in the very hearts of his people. If he would have a people as his own precious possession, well, they have so much sin. What's he going to do about that? And the flood, in some sense, not to downplay it or belittle or make it sound, like God's playing games here. It's this grand illustration of, you want to see how bad sin is? I can kill everything except for one man, his family. And it's not going to matter because sin's still going to be around. The intention, every intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Killing all flesh didn't solve the problem. Dealing with this on a global scale, wiping out everything, it's not good enough. And so why does he make the covenant? What is the point of the covenant with Noah? I'm not going to do that again, Noah, because you know why? Because we need times and seasons to continue. We need life to go on. We need generations to occur for me to send the one who's actually going to solve the problem. Floods, destruction, killing, wiping out, it's not going to solve the problem. The problem is sin. The problem is the heart. And I promise you that I won't do this again until the deliverer comes. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, Noah, right, shortly after this, he ends up getting drunk on his own crop, right? He gets drunk and embarrasses himself, and his sons see him naked, and it's just this whole mess. So we see right away, and this is one of those patterns of the Scriptures. I love Samson. The whole pattern is displayed right in him. The supposed hero needs a savior, right? That's the whole point, or one of the major points that Samson preaches to us. The supposed hero, the best human hero, they need saviors until eventually the true savior comes. So here we see Noah, and really it's interesting because Noah kind of breaks our paradigm in some sense, though the terms remain the same. Be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it. And the benefits are not exactly explicitly stated, but they continue, right? Life and death. Now after this we have Abraham, and with Abraham things become a bit more clear, though they've been clear from Adam. I'm going to start kind of moving a little bit quickly through some of this information. With Abraham, we see God make a covenant, and there we see him cut the covenant, right? Quite literally. He tells Abraham to go get some animals, cut them in half. And this is another thing that we can see archaeologically and historically. This was a common practice by the nations. These two peoples would make a covenant with each other, sacrifice animals, cut them in half, and then the parties of the covenant would walk through the middle, an expression of, may this be done to me, may I be as these animals cut in half, if I should violate this covenant, if I should violate the terms. This is the result. And how does the story with Abraham go? Does Abraham walk through the path? No. This flaming pot, right? The Lord in some sense shows up, and he is the one who goes through, expressing this, I will fulfill this covenant. Right? So you can't say the Old Testament doesn't preach the gospel, because there it is from, in some sense, the very beginning with Abraham. But to Abraham, God makes this promise of people, right, as numerous as the stars in the sky. He's going to give them a place. This place that you are in now, Abram, centuries from now, will be your possession. Abraham's going to be long gone, but his descendants will possess it. And God's presence is the third and most important and precious promise. All of these covenants build to, and notice they're all pointing back to the garden. What was the garden? Adam, you and Eve are my people. Be fruitful and multiply, produce more. You have a place in which to dwell. Spread the glory of this place throughout all the world, and I will be, my presence is even here in the garden. That one may be assumed with Adam, but it's explicit throughout the rest of the Scriptures. And then we have Moses and we have David. You can see these things continue to increase. But I want to make something clear. If the answer is going to be given away by the question, though you probably already know it. If we talk about the bicovenantal framework of the Scriptures, God makes his covenant of works with Adam. Which covenants are under the covenant of grace? All of them, right? Not just the new covenant, not just the covenant with Christ. Christ is the fulfillment. He's the final head of the covenant of grace, right? Of the new covenant, we would say. But what you see here is, I love this, maybe this, what you have in the Scriptures is actually all of this is the covenant of grace. Remember I talked about the organic development and progress of the story of redemption in the Scriptures. Well, you can see that right at the very beginning, after Adam falls, God establishes this new covenant of grace. We see it really just in the promise that God's going to send the seed of the woman to crush the head of the serpent. But then we see, okay, things get a little bit clearer with Noah. However God's going to do this, it's not going to be through this, grand global demonstration of his judgment and destruction of all things evil, because the root of evil is the heart of man. That's the problem. And then we see him make this promise to Abraham. Hey, Abraham, I'm going to take you and I'm going to make you a people. I'm going to give you a place, and you're going to dwell in my presence. And then we see things get more refined with Moses, right? He makes his commands more explicit. He writes them down for his people, even though they are already on their hearts. He establishes with his people, which are now formed, right? With Abraham, there wasn't a people yet. With Moses, there is a people, and they're about to inherit the place. And God is already with them. That's the whole point, right? Moses pleads, you have to go with us into the promised land. But God gets so angry, first he's going to kill him. Then he says, all right, no, go on. I'm not going to kill you, but go on without me. And Moses is like, that's not possible. It doesn't make sense. We can't do that. And then David, what does David provide? How does David refine and brighten and clarify the covenant? King and kingdom, perpetually. Your son, your heir, David, will sit on the throne forever, which means one of two possibilities. Either David has an unending lineage, son after son after son after son, and all of them somehow sit on the throne. Or what's the alternative? One son who will come and will somehow never die, or he will die and rise from the dead and live eternally, right? And so then we get the fullness of the covenant of grace displayed and revealed to us, not in North Carolina, but in the new covenant, right? Okay, I feel like this has all been a very disorganized and wild approach or presentation of all this stuff. So hit me with questions or comments or